Welcome, everybody. Today's Thursday, February 20th, 2025. I'm really excited to welcome everybody here to the University of Richmond School of Law AI Bootcamp. My name is Roger Skalbeck. I'm the Associate Dean for Library and Information Services, and I'm in the faculty here at the University of Richmond. We're at a pretty exciting and also kind of opportunistic point in the sort of situation with law schools, legal education, and the practice of law generally. AI is on the scene. In the fall of this current year, all entering students at schools that have Lexis and Westlaw started with commercial access to professional grade artificial intelligence tools. This past January also, students and faculty and others who have access to that also gained access to additional tools, including the co-counsel products integrated within Westlaw, which was their purchase for $6.5 billion of the case text technology. So AI is here to stay. It's transforming the law, and we're taking today as an opportunity to explore questions of what is this? How do we get behind a little bit of the substance of things in the headlines, things scaring us, things exciting us, and things like that, and trying to understand in more detail what's going on. We were initially going to do this in person, and we have a couple of inches of snow here, and University of Richmond was closed today. The great news is that meant we could move it online and we can welcome a lot more comers. Throughout the program, what we're doing here today is running this as a webinar on Zoom webinar. So you'll be able to see us as presenters. I'm going to get out of the way here in just a second, and you can ask us questions. Post questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them in real time in the Q&A chat, and then also make sure we have time at the end to go over questions as well. In addition to the webinar format that we have here, later in the program, what we will do, and also as a follow-up, is share with all attendees an opportunity to sign up for a half-an-hour Q&A with Oliver Roberts, who's agreed to come back and talk to us conversationally, sit down. This will be a more traditional Zoom setting so we can engage with things like that. So I've mentioned him a couple times, but let me officially introduce our speaker and then turn the program over to him. Today's featured guest is Oliver Roberts. What does he do? Well, he's the co-head of the AI practice group at Holtzman Vogel. He's an adjunct professor at Case Western Reserve, teaching AI and law. He's the CEO and founder of an artificial intelligence legal products company called Wickard.ai. And as if that wasn't enough, he's also the editor-in-chief for AI and Law with the National Law Review. He's doing a lot of things, and in the coming 90 minutes or so, he's going to walk us through a lot of content and a lot of substance. This is a real in-depth person, and it's virtually in person. So I'm going to step away here, be on the background here to answer the Q&A, and turn everything over to Oliver. So great to see everybody here in the chat room. Post questions if you've got them. And please, let's sit back, listen, and really engage in the substance that Oliver has prepared for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dean Skalbeck, and thank you to Dean Perdue as well for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak with you all here today. Like Dean Skalbeck said, we have an ambitious agenda. In an hour and a half, we're going to try to run through many different topics and go in depth on AI and the law. So to start off, here's a little overview of what we're actually going to cover. We're going to start with introduction to AI and LLMs. We're going to talk about some of the trends of AI implementation across different industries and then legal practice as well. We're going to talk about what are these terms, AI versus Gen AI versus large language models. We're going to get into how these LLMs actually operate and then best practices for using AI-powered chatbots. We're then going to shift and go specific into practical uses in the legal profession. We're going to talk about the ethical obligations of lawyers when they're using these tools. And then briefly, we're going to touch on some of the regulation of AI right now at the federal level as well as the state level. There's also a lot going on in Virginia this week as well, pretty active. So in an hour and a half, we're going to try and touch on all these different areas of AI more in depth. And to start off, I'm going to pose a rhetorical, does AI really matter? I'm biased, but my answer is yes. And we've all seen the headlines. We've seen all the investment going into different businesses that are AI startups or even legacy companies just integrating AI into their processes and getting a lot of funding to do so. We've seen money flowing into legal tech startups. Harvey AI, a widely used AI platform by major law firms, 30% of the Am Law 100, they just got an investment of something like $300 million. They're now valued at $3 billion. So a lot of money going in to build these legal tech tools that all of us as lawyers are going to continue to use into the future. Law firms are adopting generative AI at a very rapid rate, and I'll show you the numbers briefly. And then finally, we've seen the negative headlines. Even just 2 weeks ago, we saw another situation where a law firm and lawyers have filed hallucinated cases in the courts, leading to reprimand. So we've seen the headlines, but we're going to go beyond the headlines today and talk about the extent of AI use. So to put some numbers on that, 79% of legal professionals are now using AI in legal practice, according to Clio, which is a law firm practice management software, and that's significantly up from the year before, 2023. We also see businesses now integrating AI rather extensively. 72% of businesses have adopted AI for at least one business use case, and owners of businesses are very bullish on AI to improve efficiency and cut costs, which in turn means that us as lawyers will be seeing a lot more clients have AI-related issues as they integrate AI into their practice. Issues like data security, privacy, having to navigate 50 different potential different AI frameworks across the states in the absence of federal regulation. So this is something that is not only in the headlines, but it's actually in practice as well. ChatGPT itself, at the consumer level, over 300 million people are using it per week, and over 1 billion messages are sent every single day. And this is just ChatGPT. We, of course, have many other AI-powered chatbots. You have Gemini, you have Claude, you have Meta AI, Llama. So there are many other chatbots. This is just ChatGPT, but these numbers are astronomical. The fastest growing application in human history until it was actually surpassed by Threads, which is Instagram's version of Twitter. But at the time, it was the fastest growing application in human history. And to show you who's the main user of ChatGPT, this screenshot says 31 minutes ago. This literally came out like now 40 minutes ago, and I put it in the slide. So this just goes to show you how quickly moving this space is in AI. There's new studies, new stats, new surveys out every single day. It is a lot to keep up with. So when I say this is some of the most up-to-date info is literally from 40 minutes ago. So you can see here, students' #1 demographic using ChatGPT in the US. Main use case, starting papers and projects. Ideation, thinking of ideas, brainstorming ideas, the main leading use case among all ChatGPT users and students. So it's important to know. And for all the students here, I'm sure you've used ChatGPT. Typically, if we're in person, I'll do a little survey. Who's used ChatGPT? When I speak to larger schools, last week I was at a school, survey of 200 people, about 99% of students raise their hand and say, yes, they use ChatGPT. And these numbers back it up how significant the use of ChatGPT is among students. Now, shifting to talk about how AI is actually being used across these businesses, the wide integration, we've seen AI being used in customer service chatbots. If you have Amazon, you've seen this chatbot plugin called Rufus that's generative AI powered, where you talk to it, tell it what you want to buy, it'll help recommend things. You have AI powered call centers now. You actually have these agents that can make calls and have ongoing conversations. And I'll actually show you one example of a company that's integrating AI into customer service outreach. So I'll play this briefly for you.
Hello. Hello, this is Maya with Lily the Cleaner. Are you interested in $50 off your first house cleaning? Sure. Great. May I ask you a few questions to make sure you qualify for this offer? Yes. Are you a first-time customer? I am. How many bedrooms is your home? 3. Great, you qualify for the offer. Let me transfer you to a live agent who will...
So that's just an example of how AI is being used in one context with consumer calls. And this is going to raise a host of issues you could think from the lawyer perspective. In fact, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, they've proposed regulations to regulate calls like this, AI-powered text, AI-powered calls. It would require disclosure that AI is being used before the call even begins. So with the creation of any invention, these inventions could lead to issues where it's spam calls, auto-generated calls. And with any good invention that could be misused, you also have counter inventions. So here's another example of an AI-powered customer service startup that I find a little humorous.
In the UK, one company is now using new AI technology to trick the tricksters.
3 times W and then dot.
I think your profession is bothering people, right?
I'm just trying to have a little chat. Gosh, how time flies.
Is Daisy, an AI-generated grandmother developed by British phone company Virgin Media O2 to talk to scammers all day and basically waste their time so you don't have to. CBS News in the UK.
So just goes to show AI is being used in the business context to make phone calls, and some startups are having some fun in creating some ways to counter spam calls. Other use cases of AI across different industries. In healthcare, it's being used to very successfully detect early signs of pancreatic cysts, as well as early lung detection, lung cancer detection. It's also being used to identify breast cancer. There are some studies that show that AI is able to identify certain patterns in X-rays that humans can't even see. So there's many positive use cases in the healthcare sector. Also, there have been 2 studies out over the past year, one from Google AI showing that AI is actually better at bedside manners than some doctors in certain studies. Another one that was another report that came out and was cited in the New York Times was that AI actually did better in diagnosing patients than doctors did. So there are many promising use cases of AI in the healthcare sector that's being applied right now. AI use by the US government. Even the US government is pretty ahead on AI implementation at this point in time. NASA is using it for earth science data analysis, climate modeling, space exploration. The Department of Veterans Affairs, they've actually conducted 2 pilots. This was this past fall to use it internally as generative AI chatbots to do more administrative functions like drafting emails, summarizing documents, just doing talking points. And then the IRS has also used AI to help identify taxpayers that are eligible for tax returns, but then also to identify taxpayers who may be more prone to audits. So you can see AI is already being used in the government as well across different agencies. More so on the military side, Google, actually a week and a half ago, they quietly removed the pledge from their website saying that previously they were not going to use AI for military capabilities, for building weapons or surveillance, and now they've scrubbed that from their website. So Meta, formerly Facebook, they did a similar thing in the fall where they previously said they were not going to use their AI for military capabilities, but they backtracked on that, and now it is being used in the military context. Also in the government, we saw, and I signed this for pre-reading, if you had the chance to check it out, U.S. Congress issued a bipartisan House task force on AI report, 253 pages, just this past December. And what this did was it identified key principles and recommendations that both sides of the aisle agreed on, and they were committed to making the U.S. a leader in AI innovation. This report, it highlighted some of the positives of the drug development and healthcare uses, some of which we just talked about, the fact that it could help improve diagnostic accuracy and also add to economic efficiency and remove bureaucracy from the government. But at the same time, this report emphasized the need to have strong data protection and also the need to counter deepfakes. And what's really interesting about this report is the fact that it's bipartisan. So when you look at this, you could see where there's common ground, undisputed between both parties, and this could potentially be a prediction of where the next AI legislation could come from and what areas it'll touch on. And what I found most interesting is not only is the report bipartisan, but first, the report established philosophies and principles that both parties agree on. And the 2 I want to hone in on are 1, promoting AI innovation. So because this is a guiding accepted principle, it is agreed upon by both parties, we're going to actively promote AI innovation as a country, as a society, in Congress. And 2, we're going to empower the government with AI. So this just goes to show Congress that we're going to promote AI innovation and we're going to implement it actively into our government a lot more. Shifting now to AI in legal practice, we just did a little survey of some ways it's being used across different industries. And us as lawyers, we may have to deal with cases where maybe the government's using AI against us or against our citizens in some way, or it's being used in positive use cases, but could lead to privacy issues, data issues. And as lawyers, we may have to deal with those issues. Shifting now more so to AI use in legal practice, these are some of the main ways AI is being used by lawyers right now. First, document review and e-discovery. This is dated back to 2015. So AI has been used and AI in the general context. We'll get into the terminology about what AI actually encompasses. But AI has broadly been used in e-discovery to identify relevant documents, to help tag documents, identify and extract information from documents for a very long time. And it's very reliable in doing that. And now these tools like Relativity, like Disco, Lexby, all these e-discovery legal tech platforms, they're now integrating generative AI as well. Some of these capabilities manifest in the form of a little chatbot on the side that allows you to ask the chatbot, tell me if there's any documents in this 10,000 document batch that relate to issue XYZ. And that chatbot is able to go through those 10,000 documents and pull relevant documents for you. So this is some of the capabilities. It has a lot of limitations, accuracy issues, but this is the direction we're going where it will get more accurate. 2, predictive decision-making and analytics. There are companies out there that now give you the ability to analyze the likelihood of you winning a case based on the case facts, based on the jurisdiction, based on the judge, could tell you the likely outcome of a motion based on the judge's prior rulings. Predictive decision-making is also being used in the context of document review and e-discovery, where AI is able to tag a couple documents for relevancy, and based on that one sample size, extrapolate to the broader document set. So you can take a set of a couple hundred, and it'll extrapolate to a couple thousand automatically which documents are relevant or not. So that's some of the ways AI is being used to power predictive decision-making and analytics in legal practice. Legal research and analysis. This is one that Dean Skalbeck, he mentioned, how schools now have access to co-counsel from Westlaw, as well as Protégé from Lexis, used to be Lexis AI. So this is something you're all probably very familiar with, where you have this AI capability to help research cases. And I'll note that even before these new co-counsel and Protégé tools were rolled out to law schools and lawyers, AI was already powering traditional research. When you go search for a case, you don't just see the most recent case that was decided in that jurisdiction. You're seeing the most relevant case, or perhaps the most cited case, or most authoritative, get pushed to the top through algorithms. I don't know the insight to the algorithms that they use specifically, but you could see that phenomenon happening where it'll show you usually the most authoritative case. So AI is already being used to power traditional research that we do on Westlaw and Lexis, but now the new introduction and change has been this entry of generative AI research, where you could type in a question, and then this tool will give you a written paragraph with citations to cases answering your question. And I'll show you live demos of how co-counsel works, as well as Protégé in a little bit. And then finally, legal writing and contract drafting. AI has been used in contract drafting, contract review for quite a long time. It's like e-discovery, where it's been more accepted, more used, and more reliable. And you can think why. Contracts are very, very formulaic. So therefore, tools are able to identify when a certain provision is missing and able to recommend that you should put it in if it's missing. What's a little more difficult is legal drafting using Gen AI, because there's some probabilistic nature, less certainty, less stability in what exactly is going to get written. And if you try using ChatGPT or some other Gen AI general purpose tool to write a legal brief or legal memorandum, it's not great at doing that. So that's one of the areas where lawyers understand that generative AI could be good for a first draft, not going to be great, not going to write you a final product that you could file in the court. So with that said, that was covering some of the main ways AI is being used in legal practice. One thing I want to emphasize is the fact that at least 40 states require a duty of technological competence for lawyers. So it is our ethical and professional duty to stay on top of the tools that we actually are using. And this was added in 2012, a long time ago. So this is not a new phenomenon in response to AI. This was in response to mass use of technology, even just email across the legal profession back in 2012. So this was added as a comment 8 to Model Rule 1.1. And you can see I underlined here the key operative provision, that is, we as lawyers must maintain competence to have the requisite knowledge and skill as a lawyer to keep abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. Of course, this, interpreting it through the lens of modern times, this would be AI. So before you use an AI tool, it is your responsibility, ethically and professionally, to understand the technology that you're actually using. And is in at least 40 states. Key takeaway from that little survey we did, we talked about AI use in healthcare, customer service across different industries. We talked about its use by the government and where we're likely going in the future with the promotion of more AI innovation and use cases in government itself. And finally, we talked about the use cases in legal practice. So the key takeaway from all that is AI is deeply integrated across industries, business world, in the government, and in the practice of law today. With that said, those are some of the benefits. AI has also presented many issues and challenges. Some of the big ones, these came to mind and were making the headlines more so during the election in 2024. But even outside the context of elections and deepfakes and campaigns, it's also an issue with scammers. They're using deepfakes to help to trick people into selling real estate, into mimicking people's voices. You could take a small clip of someone's voice and extrapolate that into a full conversation powered by Gen AI to trick a loved one. And then a high profile use case, like I mentioned, was in elections. So in the past election, there was this use case which a political consultant took a snippet of Joe Biden's voice and then used it to try and suppress voters in New Hampshire. And I'll actually play that live so you can see how realistic it sounds.
Actually, troubling uses of artificial intelligence when it comes to political campaigns. Well, here in New Hampshire, we're already seeing an example of just that.
Important that you save your vote for the November election. We'll need your help in electing Democrats up and down the ticket. Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again.
Now, let's be clear. That was a robocall placed to voters right where we are here in New Hampshire, and the voice sounded an awful like President Biden urging people to not vote in today's primary. Here's the thing, though. That was not Joe Biden. It was what they call a deep fake. It was all created by artificial intelligence.
So that just goes to show you deepfakes, not only videos, not only pictures, could be voice as well. That political consultant was fined $6 million. And this issue is not going to go away. OpenAI, they released Sora, which is their text to video and image creation tool, just this past December. So now if you have access to ChatGPT Plus, $20 a month, you could create highly realistic videos. And I mean very highly realistic. And we'll actually go through a very short segment here, real or fake, to see if you can see the difference between a real video and something created by OpenAI's Sora. So I'm going to play a short video, and then we'll do a show of I don't think we can do show of hands, but I guess you could comment in the chat, real or fake, after you watch this. This is an image of a bank robbery through a security cam. You could comment real or fake in the chat.
Actually, I'll have to turn on raise hands for you. We have disabled the chat. Sorry.
No problem.
Attendees can now raise their hands.
Raise your hand if you think it is. Let's go. Raise your hand if you think it is fake. $20-ish. Okay. So this one is in fact fake. I literally typed in OpenAI Sora. This took probably 30 seconds. Create highly realistic security footage of a bank robbery. And notice I put it through security cam. It looks like a security camera. It looks realistic to an extent, but it is fake. And we'll do one more. Here is a video of someone smoking in the vestibule of an apartment. Raise your hand if you think this is, let's go real this time. All right, couple more coming in. This one is fake. So this is another example. My prompt was security camera footage showing tenants breaking property rules. Looks pretty realistic, but this one is again fake. So this just goes to show deepfakes are more realistic than ever before. There are other videos that you could see out there that look so realistic, and they're totally fake. And you may be thinking, why does this matter? Because one, you can think evidence fabrication. If I'm able to create these videos of people doing things in certain contexts, you can think about those being offered in court. And we may reach a point where it's indiscernible between whether something is real or fake. And this is also a big subject area for proposed legislation. There are many states that have introduced bills. I believe it's over 19 at this point. States that have introduced bills to outlaw deepfakes, specifically in the context of influencing elections. And also other big ones are outlawing the use of AI to create pornography or explicit content. That's another area. So this is a very hot topic being regulated at the state level. And then finally, you think about litigation. If you create a generative AI deepfake of someone in a compromising position, you can think about possible litigation of false light, defamation, So this is a very high profile issue being presented by AI, and a lot of the states are trying to figure out ways to solve it, whether it is outright banning it, requiring reporting if you're going to use a generative AI deepfake for election purposes, or requiring a watermark. Basically, you think on TikTok how videos have that logo of TikTok on there so you could trace it back to its source. That is another proposed solution. And I'll show you one real world example. This happened very, very often. And this one's from just 2-ish weeks ago, where in an election in Wisconsin for the Supreme Court, one candidate created a AI-powered deepfake edit, and you can see it right here, and then filed an ethics complaint. So this is Susan Crawford. On the right is a real photo of Susan Crawford, and the opposing campaign made a video and edited it so she's looking not happy. So this is one of those cases that I did a survey when I taught at the last school. Should we outlaw this? Should this be something that's not permissible and should be covered by deepfakes? And it was a 50-50 split. Because you can see it's a small modification, but it is nonetheless a modification. So that is why these deepfake laws are not straightforward, where it's like you'll see some of the most salient issues, some of the most egregious, and you say, yes, we got to ban that. But this is more of a borderline one. Should we be banning this and this type of expression? And this, of course, implicates many First Amendment rights, especially in the political context as well. And I've linked this further so you can actually see the statute in Wisconsin that requires that synthetic media must contain a disclaimer, contains content generated by AI. So that's one of the ways Wisconsin has dealt with this synthetic media, AI edited or AI made. They require this disclaimer, and that's one approach. Another issue, that was deepfakes. One of the big issues, one of the hot topics for legislators was that use of deepfakes and how it's going to be legislated, especially in the context of elections. Another big issue presented by AI is copyright. And you could think, in order to make ChatGPT, in order to make all these large language models, you have to use a lot of text. And a lot of this text has been taken from the web. And then to make Sora, that text-to-video tool I just showed you, they had to take a bunch of videos and images to train the model so it can now create new images. And here is just a very quick clip from then OpenAI CTO, Chief Technology Officer, when she was asked, how did you guys train Sora, that text-to-video tool? Here's her reaction.
It was used to train Sora.
We used publicly available data and licensed data.
So videos on YouTube?
I'm actually not sure about that.
Okay. Videos from Facebook, Instagram?
You know, if they were publicly available, publicly available to use, there might be the data, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not confident about it.
What about Shutterstock? I know you guys have a deal with them.
I'm just not going to go into the details of the data that was used, but it was publicly available or licensed data.
Yeah, so that's a little questionable. And there's over 38 copyright cases now where you have publishers, both in the context of video publishers, image publishers, as well as just publishers like the New York Times, AP News, New York Post. All these publishers have created this content, suing AI companies, both the LLM model companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, as well as companies that have built upon these to build other use cases in AI. These publishers are suing the AI companies, claiming that their copyrights were infringed. So there's a lot of litigation still ongoing. There's a big decision in a Thomson Reuters versus Ross Intelligence. If you want to check it out, I recommend Googling that case, and you can actually see one decision by Judge Bybos in the Third Circuit to see that being one of the main decisions that have been made. OpenAI, New York Times versus OpenAI, that's kind of one of the headline cases driving forward faster than the other ones. So that's another one to check out if you really want to get into the detail of this AI and copyright issue. So those are some of the issues arising at the societal level, but then getting more into some of the issues and challenges presented by AI in legal practice. That's what we're going to interface with as lawyers. Here's some of those issues. One, we're going to see new legislation and regulation. We've already seen it. Colorado is the first state in the country to pass a comprehensive AI regulatory framework. It regulates high-risk AI. Illinois passed a law regulating AI use in the employment sector. California has passed a flurry of laws regulating and requiring things like watermarking, basically identifying where data came from in the training process. Many of these laws, including Colorado, California, they don't go into effect till 2026. So we haven't really seen the effect on them, the effect on those laws on these AI companies yet. But as lawyers, we're going to have clients that are going to face these regulations and this legislation and have to navigate it potentially in 50 different states. Other issues that we're going to see in practice as lawyers is reviewing vendor contracts. So if you're at a law firm and you've used these tools like Westlaw and Lexis and Disco and Relativity, you've used these tools for a long time. You might have contracts in place. But now that they're introducing generative AI, that's kind of a game changer in terms of how your data is being used. Are they training on your data? How are they protecting privacy given this new nature of generative AI where inputs are often trained on? So reviewing these contracts or data protection, confidentiality, monitoring and notification of AI updates, this is all stuff that lawyers will have to do in practice, especially if you're at your own law firm or smaller law firm, midsize. You may be tasked with doing stuff like this and vetting your vendors. Other things you may interface with are AI-related deals and transactions. A lot of these companies are now hiring their own AI vendors or parties to come in and build AI tools. And there's questions about copyright issues. If we as a business use an AI tool and that AI tool creates some output that infringes upon someone else's copyright, are we liable as the business that's using that tool? Or is just this AI company that gave us their product, are they liable because their product is the one that gave that copyright, that led to that copyright infringement output? So there's all these new issues arising in deals and transactions and contracts. And then finally, expert declarations, new forms of evidence, and then methods of presenting evidence could change. There's a case, this isn't necessarily AI, but it's kind of within the same area down in Florida, Broward County in December. A defense counsel used virtual reality headsets to reenact a stand your ground situation. And they gave it to the judge, and the judge actually watched it live. So it's a very cool use case, potentially a new way of presenting evidence in court. Expert declarations, we're going to get to that in a little bit, so I'm going to hold off. And new forms of evidence, potentially, we could see in the future, people in litigation, lawyers, rather than just verbally reciting what happened in a scenario, what if you just type it into Sora, OpenAI Sora, and you recreate the thing live? It's a lot more salient to a jury or a judge if they could visualize it. And there's actually studies on this that even if you've never experienced a situation, if you're seeing it live and able to visualize it, there are studies that say you may think down the line that you did actually experience that. So this impact of maybe new ways to introduce evidence in a more salient way is going to raise issues in rules of evidence. So there's a lot of things that are going to change in the future. These are just some of the issues we may encounter in legal practice as a result of the expansive use of AI. And now I'm going to jump to that point I made about expert declarations, and we'll get there. But one of the other issues presented in legal practice by AI proliferation is the filing of hallucinated cases. And you might have thought it went away. 2023 was kind of the peak where we saw these headlines popping up in New York and Colorado of lawyers using generative AI to do research. And then these hallucinated cases come out and they file them in court without checking them. Yet it keeps happening. This is from 2 weeks ago, February 6th, out in the District of Wyoming. And this was actually a big law firm, Morgan & Morgan. They're national in scope. So this is not just small practitioners of a 1 to 2 person office. It's happening at some of the biggest firms. And this lawyer, he did his research, found 9 total cases. And the issue was none of them existed except for one. And that case was basically off the point. And this lawyer, a week later, he was forced to file a declaration with the court after an order to show cause for why he should not be disciplined. And in this declaration, he admitted, this was my first time in my career that I ever used AI for queries of this nature. So this just underscores there are still lawyers out there that have not used generative AI. And if you do not know the best practices, you don't know the limitations, you could end up in a situation where if everyone else at your firm is using a tool for research and you just want to jump on the bandwagon and use it, you could end up in a situation like this. So this is another warning to law students, warning to anyone in legal practice. These generative AI tools still hallucinate. They're improving, but they still hallucinate, and you need to always double check your outputs. And like I said, keeps happening. This was not just an issue in 2023. There's another case from November, a lawyer down in Texas. He was fined $2,000 and had to attend a generative AI CLE. So keeps happening. And finally, I get to the point where I mentioned some of the issues are in AI, reviewing your expert declarations. because even the experts are using AI tools improperly. And this was an expert from Stanford. He's an expert in communication and false information. So this was a case involving a deepfake law in Minnesota. And the attorney general, who is defending the constitutionality of this law, called in this expert from Stanford, this expert in communication and misinformation, brought him in, and he wrote a declaration in support of the deepfake law. Just so happened, though, he used AI to write his expert declaration. And in the course of doing that, he cited hallucinated cases, did not double check. And the attorney general was forced to file with the court and say, hey, court, my expert in misinformation accidentally filed misinformation. So even the experts and you as lawyers, being able to identify this is very important. You don't want to be in a situation where your experts are totally discredited due to their misuse of artificial intelligence. And it's a best practice for you to ask your experts or anyone you're dealing with, even non-expert witnesses, if they used AI in the preparation of their materials before they get filed in court. And finally, other issues that you're going to encounter as a result of the proliferation of AI are different local rules. This started first with Judge Brantley Starr down in the district court for the Northern District of Texas. He came out ahead of everyone else and said, hey, if you're going to use AI in my court, you have to sign a certification letting me know you used it. Many other judges followed suit, both at the federal and state level. However, there's now a trend, and I'll cite the Illinois Supreme Court as an example. They just issued a new policy effective January 1 of this year, where they say, you don't need to do an extra certification that used AI. You're already responsible for filing truthful information in the court, and adding an AI certificate is just redundant. The Fifth Circuit followed the same route, and there's no federal appellate courts at this point in time that have this requirement for an extra AI certification. But with that said, there's more than 200 judges that had at some point some type of AI certification or some rule related to AI. So it's very important for you as a practicing lawyer, aspiring lawyer, to be able to identify and do the research before you file in court to ensure that you don't have to do some type of certification. There's even one court, I believe it's Illinois, totally bans the use of AI for the preparation of materials filed in court, which when we come to see the definition of AI, doesn't really make sense because using spell check is a form of using artificial intelligence. So it'll be very tough to file anything in that court if it's abiding by the true definition of artificial intelligence. But this is a practice point, very important for young lawyers, especially because you are usually the ones who will do that final research on local rules before filing. So this finally wraps up that first inquiry I asked quite a bit ago. Does AI really matter? My answer is yes. It is here to stay. It is across all industries, government, and in legal practice. And why does learning about AI matter? Just to sum it up before we shift over to talk about terminology, you're going to encounter in practice. Your employers are going to give you AI tools, and they may even require you to use it. And a lot of it's client-driven. I had a guest speaker a couple weeks ago from a big law firm. He's the chief innovation officer, and he told me clients are asking law firms, how are you using AI to drive efficiency and cut the costs on our client matters? So it's something that clients are driving law firms to use actively. And in turn, if you're at a law firm, you may be required to use these tools on different matters. The opposing side may use it. Someone you're up against may use it to do generative AI research, and there could be hallucinated cases. So knowing that these tools still have the propensity to put out hallucinated cases, you could stay on top of this stuff and help strategize against the other side. And judicial orders, like we just said, doing that research before filing locally is very important to ensure you're staying compliant with all local rules and judge-specific rules. 2, your experts and vendors may use it. You don't want to end up like that attorney general in Minnesota where your experts undermined because they used AI improperly. And also, you're using all these vendor tools like research tools, timekeeping tools. You need to know how your vendors are using generative AI because ultimately it's your responsibility to maintain attorney-client privilege. You don't want to put very sensitive information into a Gen AI tool that gets regurgitated out to somebody else because there's not proper security and privacy measures in place by your vendors. So it's important for you to understand how those tools are being used and how they're using your client data. 3, your clients are going to have issues related to AI. Many different frameworks are going to be coming into fruition over the coming 2 years. So your clients are going to have to navigate these different issues. 4, ethical obligations, understand it. At least 40 states have that technological requirement. And also there's ABA guidance and different states have different guidance. Florida has its own opinion on generative AI use. So understanding your ethical obligations, that is to fully understand the technology that you're using, that underscores why you need to learn about these tools before you actually use them. You will encounter it in your everyday life. To be a well-rounded lawyer, you should be following updates. You should understand how this technology works, how it's changing society. Because if you have a client call you up and ask about DeepSeek, that's a Chinese AI model that caused a $1 trillion market sell-off about 3 weeks ago, if you get a call and you don't even know the first things about AI or DeepSeek, then your client may not call you again when they have to deal with other AI-related issues. It's just being a well-rounded lawyer, understanding how AI is changing the economy, changing business, how it's affecting different areas that your clients are entering into. So that summarizes why it's important to learn about AI, how it's changing different industries, and how it's changing legal practice. We're now going to shift over and talk about understanding just the basics of AI terminology. And we're going to start off with the definition of artificial intelligence. And it's important to understand this is a broad category. A lot of people will conflate today AI and ChatGPT and think they're the same thing. But no, ChatGPT is just one example of this very broad category of artificial intelligence. And AI is just technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human intelligence and problem solving. So if something requires problem solving by a person and technology is able to solve that problem, then that is a form of artificial intelligence. Examples are pick up your phone, Face ID, automatically does the password and allows you in. That is a form of artificial intelligence. Open up Instagram, notice it'll pop up some of your top friends or family rather than just showing you the most recent post. That is a form of artificial intelligence, where those algorithms that you can't see, they're driving content that you find most interesting because it'll drive up engagement, which drives ad revenue for these companies. Those algorithms on social media are a form of artificial intelligence. Self-driving cars, you have Waymo. There's a lot of it in Phoenix in California. That's an example of artificial intelligence. And then finally, generative AI tools like OpenAI's ChatGPT, like Gemini, like text-to-video and Sora. Those are all examples of artificial intelligence. Now, another important term to get down is generative AI. That's Gen AI for short. You'll hear that very often. Easy way to remember this is generate. That's the big difference. This is a subset of artificial intelligence where you're generating new content. So this is deep learning models that generate high quality text, video, images, any output based on data it was trained on. So just remember, generative AI, you're generating something new. You're creating new text, new videos, new images. That's the big differentiator. A subset of generative AI, because again, generative AI could be text, videos, images. One subset of generative AI is large language models. And this is what is powering ChatGPT and Gemini. And this is where that term LLM falls in to the hierarchy of artificial intelligence. So LLM, large language model, producing just text. You also have image generation models, that's text to image, audio generation models. You saw the example with Joe Biden, that deepfake, where text to audio. And then finally, below that, now getting into the weeds of large language models, GPT-4, that's powering ChatGPT, BERT, Google's version of an LLM, and Llama, that's Meta, formerly Facebook's version of a large language model. And here, for the visual learners, I like this chart. It's easier to remember and see that hierarchy. Biggest one is artificial intelligence here, a subset, and we're not going to go in depth on machine learning and deep learning, given our time limitations. But you have artificial intelligence, broadest category. A subset is machine learning. You just think of that as algorithms that take data and learn patterns and make predictions. You have deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning and involves neural networks. This is the core infrastructure of large language models and identifies many different relationships between data. You then have generative AI. That's an important takeaway I want you to leave with. AI, Gen AI, and large language models as just one subset of generative AI. Now we're going to hone in specifically on large language models. So you've probably seen many of these, if not all of them. You have ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Llama. When you're engaging with these chatbots, you're engaging with the interface. What's really powering it, the tech underneath it, is the large language model. So you'll hear them kind of interchangeably where, oh, I'm talking to ChatGPT and it's an AI model or an LLM. So you're going to hear them pretty interchangeably, but really you're interacting with the interface and underneath it is the large language model powering it. And you have different versions of large language models where you have GPT-4, GPT-01, O3, those are all examples of large language models. So large language models are AI models designed to create and replicate human language. That's their goal, to create this text that's human-like. And now we're going to get into how they work. We now know what AI is. We now know Gen AI. We know what large language models are and all those definitions. Now we're going to talk about how they actually work. An important thing to understand before getting into the weeds of it is that large language models, they're still a black box. Developers, scientists, the people making these models, they understand generally the infrastructure of how they work end to end, but they're not able to actually map out, start to finish, every single step of the way. That's because when data goes in, that's your input, it goes through processes and it's processed alongside data points, which parameters, that's a formal term for weights and biases inside the large language model. There are billions and trillions now of data processing points. So it's virtually impossible right now for developers and scientists to track the input all the way to the output. So there's a lot of unknowns and emerging capabilities. That's capabilities that when you build large language models, sometimes they develop these capabilities that are unintended. Some examples are LLM's ability to do certain translations in other languages that were emergent. They weren't developed that way. It just so happened when they kept scaling LLMs, they found these new capabilities. So that just goes to show that it's not totally understood how they work, and it's leading to really cool discoveries that were previously unknown. But that's important to understand the fact that this still has the black box nature of what's going on in LLMs. With that said, we're now going to go through a high-level summary of how LLMs are actually created, and then get into one example from start to finish, the actual flow of your input to the output that an LLM gives. So here, large language models are first trained on massive data sets to learn patterns. You're basically taking all the books you could think of in human history, taking Wikipedia articles. We're talking millions and millions of data points in articles. You're taking Reddit conversations, news articles, like I said, New York Times, New York Post. These are just taken in large language models. They're trained through algorithms to just identify patterns in human language. So it's looking at what words commonly follow one another, what spelling, what syntax is commonly occurring in the human language, and it's just identifying those patterns. So ultimately, it can then identify those patterns and then produce new outputs that just mimic all the patterns in language that it learned in that huge data set. So that's what's going on. And they're not trained to do research or learn knowledge and retain it. They're just regurgitating based on the patterns they've seen. Step two, LLMs are fine-tuned. If you were to stop at step one, you'd have a model that just regurgitates a bunch of nonsense, continues just rambling on. Step two is the fine-tuning stage, where you're actually teaching the model how to follow instructions. You're telling it, here's what an input looks like from a real human like me, and here's what a structured output should look like. So you're fine-tuning the model so it's more coherent and able to respond in a useful way compared to just gibberish like you'd have at the end of step one. Step three, you now have a model that's giving better responses, but you still need to improve it. You need to evaluate the quality of the output. You need to test its abilities in different domains. So you bring in more humans to do human feedback and reinforced learning. That's essentially humans testing inquiries and then marking it as a good response, bad response, and that data is then used to help fine-tune the model again and keep improving it. So high-level summary of how LLMs are created, identify patterns in all this data that we found online and web scraped, questionable where it came from, if it was used permissibly. We'll find out in those 38 copyright cases how it goes. Step one, fine-tuning it, step two, and then having humans constantly improve the feedback so these models get better. So now we're going to get into how the LLMs work. And that is, how do they work and instantaneously give you some type of output? How do we go from a user input, a very simple example here, the dog eats from the, when you put it in, you get the bowl. How does ChatGPT know how to finish that sentence coherently? Well, let's go through the process. I'm first going to show you the whole process. It'll make no sense to you, but we're going to break it down step by step. So by the end of it, you will understand the process. So this is what's going on. You put in that input as a user. You type in the dog eats from the, right into ChatGPT. You hit enter. From there, the large language model takes your input and tokenizes it, breaks it up into small words. Those words are then converted into embeddings, which are vector representations, string of numbers you could think of. It's then passed through the neural network. This is the core infrastructure where there's many different layers drawing relationships between the words that you put in And the training data that this model has seen, it's a lot more complex, but we're not going to get in depth on neural networks today, given time limitations. But the neural network will then produce a universe of outputs based on probabilities. And this probability is the likelihood that this word in this chart will finish that sentence. And the question is, where do these probabilities come from? They come from the training data. So when this large language model was trained on all this data, it would see common words follow each other many, many times. And in this training data, it would constantly see that the dog is eating from a bowl. It'll see it in stories, it'll see it in books, it'll see it all this, showing that the patterns commonly show a dog eating is usually from a bowl. So that's how these probabilities are produced based on not only the existence of this pattern in the training data, but also the frequency of it happening so many times over and over. The LLM is able to associate those words and predict that it's most likely to happen next. So you can see the output probabilities. The dog eats from the fish, makes no sense, low probability. Bowl makes a lot of sense, high probability. Kite, low probability, makes no sense. Floor could be possible, higher probability, but not the best probability. And then mat, possible, but lower probability. So that at a super high level is how large language models are actually operating when you put an input and get an output. We're now going to break it up step by step. And two important phenomena to keep into mind. Just mentioned them, but I would really want to hone in on them because they're important takeaways for today to understanding the operations of LLMs. Large language models are predicting the next most likely token. And I put word in parentheses, and it's all based on the past training data it's seen. The reason I put word in parentheses is because LLMs, they're actually breaking human language into subparts as an intermediate step. So they're not actually predicting the next full word, they're predicting the next token. And that's an important distinction. You'll hear a lot of people say word. In theory, you could say that's correct, but it's really predicting the next token. So it'll actually break words into subparts and not give you full words if the word's a lot more complex. But just remember, this is the tokenization process, predicting the next token. Other important phenomenon, LLMs do not know the correct information. When you put in a question, it's not going into its research database and doing research and fact checking to find the right answer. It is literally probabilistic. It is looking at the patterns and saying, what is the most likely next word based on the training data we have seen? So it is predicting based on patterns, not doing research, not scrutinizing information. That is important to understand, especially in the context of law, where we're asking for case citations, which LLMs are not going to do the research for you. They're not going to scrutinize precedent. They're just going to predict patterns. And if that training data for a case does not exist, then that case is not going to get given to you. And this large language model will just create some nonsense to finish the sentence based on low probability of data it's seen in other contexts and give you a totally made up answer because its job is not to fact find. So those are two important phenomena to understand. And now we're going to jump into it. Like I said, you put an input, the dog eats from the right into a ChatGPT model. The text, the large language model is going to process the text and inputs using tokens. So that's step one, breaking up the words. Note here, these are very simplistic words. So the words will map on to tokens that are the same. If you use a more complex word like contractual obligation, a large language model may break up contract, you all, ob, li, and engations as separate tokens. But I want to keep this one simple, so they do map on to words in this context. But this is the tokenization phase. After you have tokenization, that is breaking up the subwords, these subwords are then converted into embeddings. An embedding is a high-dimensional vector representation of tokens, and it's capturing semantic meaning. You may be thinking to yourself, what the heck does that even mean? So we're going to break it down. Embeddings. Just think a string of words, a string of numbers. You're taking the tokens, which are words, converting it into numbers. And the reason that happens is computers, they read numbers, 0 and 1s. They can't read words like humans. So there needs to be that step where you're converting the tokens, which are words and subwords, into actual numbers. So this is what an embedding is. It's converting that subword into a string of numbers. And high dimensional, so we understand it's numbers, and we understand it's a high dimensional vector. So that just means it is mapped in this space where as humans, we can't even comprehend. We comprehend graphs that are 2D, 3D, 4D possibly, but there are so many dimensions drawing relationships between these embeddings. We as humans can't even comprehend it because it's hundreds, potentially thousands of different dimensions being mapped. And I'll show you what I mean briefly. First, I want to show you why does it need to be high dimensional? Like if we're comparing the word dog and eats and bowl, these are such simple words. But let's just say we're comparing fruit, like apple, pear, banana. These are so simple, these words. Like, why can't we just compare them on like 3D axes based on size, color, whatever? Well, you can think about it. When you're comparing words to one another, which is what large language models do, because they're predicting the next most likely word based on relationships between words, you could compare words and concepts in so many different ways. If you're describing fruit, we could talk about its color, its size, its weight, its sweetness, its cost, maybe what country it's imported from or imported to. So there's so many different ways to compare words and then take them into different contexts, and then they may have totally different meanings and then have totally different ways to compare them to the words they were originally compared to. So the takeaway is there's so many ways to compare words. It's why we have to do it in a high dimensional space, not just on a 2D or 3D axis. It has to be hundreds or even thousands of ways to relate words to one another. So that's the importance of the high dimensional aspect. And here's an example. Is it better to conceptualize for the visual learners here? Let's say we have these words: goose, eagle, bee, helicopter, drone, rocket. If you're looking at the north axis here, you have sky. All these things are headed upwards. All the arrows for all these words are headed upwards because they're all things that are in the sky. So if you compare these words to one another, they're related because they're in the sky. But let's say we want to compare things that have wings. You can see the axis going to what would be my left here. Goose, eagle, bee, they're all heading in the same direction on that axis because they have wings. But now helicopter, drone, and rocket are headed in the opposite direction because they don't have wings. So you could see things might have relationships that they're all in the sky, but if you compare it based on wings or on the other side, engines, you have to demonstrate that they are not related with respect to those other categories. So this is how large language models operate with the mapping of vector embeddings, showing relationships between words in many different contexts and characteristics at the same time. And there could be hundreds or even thousands of these dimensions to compare these words to one another. And I want to demonstrate this one point because what we said was embeddings are capturing semantic information. What is semantic information? This will show you what semantic information means. By a show of hands, are these the same word? If you say, yes, these are the same word, raise your hand. Don't be shy. Raise your hand high if you think that these are the same words. So we have 14 up to 18. Okay. Maybe. That's the answer. How do you know? There's really no way to know. I could be thinking like, yeah, these are the same words, but then I could hit you with this example. Maybe they're the same word, maybe not. You can see here on the left, my left, I think it's also your left, I swam by the river bank. And you see the picture, I'm talking about a river bank. But now on the right, I have my money at the bank, and now it's a financial institution. So how do we know if they're the same word or not? The answer is context. So understanding a word based on its context is understanding its semantic meaning, not just the word as it's written, but understanding semantically how it's used in relation to other words. That's capturing its semantic meaning. And it's very important for large language models. They do have this ability to understand semantic meaning because of all the relationships. Take this example on, again, I think it's my left and yours, the one with the riverbank. I wrote to ChatGPT, finish this story. I swam by the bank, but the bank was. The fact that I used the word swam alerts the ChatGPT based on the context that I'm talking about a riverbank because people swim in a river. So it's able to put those words and understand that those words are all related based on the training data and context it's seen that word in, and finish the story based on its understanding that, yes, I'm talking about a riverbank because I swam by it. Then on the right, I wrote, finish the story. I drove to the bank, but the bank was closed. So it's able to finish the sentence because I said I drove to the bank. Based on all the training data it's seen, when someone's driving to a bank, it's usually a financial institution and not a riverbank. So this just demonstrates semantic information and the ability of large language models to see words that literally are written the same, but understand them differently based on the context that they're in. So this is what vector embeddings allow large language models to do. So key takeaways to wrap it up: vector embedding, super complicated, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or reach out afterwards. But large language models take text, put it into tokens, subwords. Tokens are converted into vector embeddings, which are numerical representations, strings and numbers. They're then mapped in this high dimensional space. You can see on the right, this is only, I think, 3D. So this is very simple. It's a lot more complex. And the numerical representations and positioning of tokens allows large language models to understand the semantic similarity of words, basically comparing them on different axes based on the context and relationship between them. That allows the large language model to ultimately produce coherent output based on the context of your input. So that is how large language models work. And you can see tokens converted to numerical representations. After those embeddings, the numerical representations, they're passed through the neural network layer. That's the core architecture and is super complex. I'll show you how complex it is visually in a little bit, but we're not going to go in depth on it. But you just think this is the point at which all the relationships are drawn between the words and the training data, and where the process is that creates that list of probabilities of words that could possibly get put out as the output. So here's the process. We just went through it. Input, tokenization, embedding process, converting it to numbers, pass through the neural network. All those relationships between the words are established and compared to the training data. Then produced is this possible list of outcomes based on probabilities, based on what it saw in the training data. And then ultimately, what's selected is usually the highest probability word. I say usually because there's some variation. There's this term called temperature. It's set by the developers, not the users. So developers can determine how randomized the output should be. And in such cases, the highest probability word may not be selected because the developers want some creativity, so you don't get the same word every time. But usually it's the highest probability word. And I'll give you another example. The capital of the USA is, input goes in, there's a tokenization embedding process, passed to the neural network. Basic, a simplified way, what's going on is the large language model is not doing research to answer your question of the capital of the USA is Washington, D.C. What it's doing is looking at the training data. All the New York Times articles that'll say the capital of the USA is Washington, D.C., or it'll have other iterations like so-and-so event happened in Washington, D.C., the capital of the U.S. So it'll constantly see in the training data high frequency references to the capital of the U.S. being Washington, D.C. And then based on this frequent pattern, it's able to predict the next most likely word, the next most likely token / word is Washington, D.C. With such high confidence, it'll then output that as the answer. And then I promised you the full process, a lot more complex. This is what the full process looks like. Red over here on the left, input, tokenization, embedding. That's what we covered in depth. This whole area in between, the neural network, also known as the transformer architecture, super complex. And then you have the output at the end. So I left here, and we'll provide these slides after. I left here this link so you could actually go and do the interactive version of this to actually go step by step if you're interested in seeing the complex steps in between. But again, like I said earlier, this is somewhat of a black box. We generally understand the general process from end to end. We do not know every single data point and processing point in between in the neural network layer. Okay, we're going to shift to hallucinations, but I'll take any questions if we have, because we're now going to shift over into more of the practical side of things. Any questions at this point?
Thanks a lot, Oliver. What I'll do is I'll read some of the questions that have come through in the chat. And then also for anybody attending, I'm just going to highlight that we have talked Oliver into coming back to have a conversation face-to-face with us in March. So we'll share.
We're not done yet. We still have more.
I know. But you wanted questions now about what's going on here. I'll just give you very briefly where we're at with this. We'll run through these rapid fire. I think you can answer them quickly. First question is, do you expect judges to start issuing harsher sanctions for hallucinated cases?
I think it's possible. I mean, a lot of these are happening in different jurisdictions. So judges may not be aware of what's going on in other jurisdictions or kind of what precedents are out there. But I think it would be warranted at this point in time. Lawyers are on notice from APA opinions from this fall, from last summer, Florida opinions out there. Lawyers generally should have an understanding of the tech they're using. So I do think we could see harsher penalties come about. The lawyer in the Wyoming case, he was very apologetic and he took full responsibility, even said like local counsel who signed off should not be responsible. So he's very apologetic. So I think it could be case by case, but we could see harsher ones come out in the future.
Got it. And a related one real quickly, it's a variation on this. Do you think that there's a new level of work created for lawyers to confirm every case that's cited is now legitimate to ensure they're not hallucinations? Or I'll add to that, or is this a Rule 11 binding that maybe that's sort of like what lawyers have always had to do, which says the thing you're saying is true is true?
Yeah, I don't think there's any new obligation. Lawyers have always been responsible for reading cases, and you've never been allowed to file fake cases or misrepresent them. So it's nothing new. I think it's just a lack of understanding of these tools, thinking they're a silver bullet and that they're accurate, and then a degree of just laziness and not rechecking them. Because pre-AI, generative AI tools, I don't think a lawyer would think about like, let me go just make up a case and file it, or pull this case because it came up in the search results and not read it. So I don't think any new obligation has came about. I think it's just a lack of understanding and over trust in these tools, which are still not accurate.
Perfect. I'll ask one more question, then we've got a couple queued up for the very end of the session here. Is spell check on Microsoft Word AI or is it predictive?
So spell check, I mean, it's a little bit of both, but I mean, AI, if something's predictive, I mean, it could in theory be a form of AI. It depends what other aspects it has, but spell check is a form of artificial intelligence where it's solving a problem for humans, that is trying to write correct English. And a lot of spell check, I don't know the full tech stack of it, but I'd assume on the back end, it's just able to identify hardline rules, less generative AI, more so just rule-based old style machine learning, where it's able to say, if a word is spelled like this, and it would be a whole list of ways words are commonly misspelled, then suggest this. So I'd expect that to be a lot less generative AI, more so old school machine learning with hardline rules that are pre-coded.
Perfect. I'll let you pick up where we left off, and we'll return to any final questions at the end of the session. Great.
Awesome. All right, we're now going to shift focus. We now know about the terminology. We know about how large language models work. We're now going to shift over more to the legal AI tool side of things. So I want to start with a bunch of general understandings about generative AI in legal practice right now. I already touched on this one a little bit earlier. There's a general understanding AI is good at a first draft or a starting point. It's not going to get you to the finish line. It's not going to give you a great final product. It's also very good at brainstorming and ideation, and pretty good at summarizing documents and transcripts. The longer a document, usually the worse the summary will be, just because of the context window that generative AI has. That is the number of words that generative AI could actually comprehend and consider before it starts losing focus or losing its abilities. So it's better at smaller scale documents rather than big ones. Generative AI, still very prone to hallucinations. It's a dated study at this point because there's been old models that were used as the API. That is, older generative AI models were used as a foundation for Westlaw as well as Lexis. But a study from May 2024 said that Westlaw and Lexis were still hallucinating at about 17 to 34% of the time, which is very high for legal research. So it's important to know that these tools, whether it's Lexis, Westlaw, any research tool, any generative AI tool, still very prone to hallucinations. And you need to double check that. And you don't have to take my word for it. These tools, the leaders, will explicitly tell you, here's an example, co-counsel, the above response is AI generated, may contain errors. It should be verified for accuracy. So even the makers of these tools that are selling you these tools, they will tell you, you need to double check your work. Not replacing lawyers for now. There's a general understanding across legal practice that lawyers are not going to get replaced. I personally think maybe 5 years from now, this will be more of a realization. And I think the conversations will start earlier than most people think. And I think this will manifest in the form of document review. Already, document review has been cut significantly. That is the time a lawyer would typically do it manually versus automated processes. So I think this will happen in a more gradual approach where lower level repetitive work of lawyers will get replaced, especially if AI is good enough to write a first draft of a contract that may be equivalent or surpass the abilities of a first year, second year associate. So if that happens, then law firms may evaluate their economic models and their investment in training and all the other requirements for hiring an associate vis-a-vis a tool that could do it instantaneously. So this is something to look at. I think this is going to come about this replacement conversation will come about a lot sooner than people think. And AI has been historically used in e-discovery and contract review by law firms. So it's a lot more accepted. There's been benchmarking. So you're able to evaluate like the accuracy rates of e-discovery, AI-powered e-discovery tools compared to new tools like generative AI research, where like last May 2024, that was one of the first major studies of generative AI in legal research and its accuracy. Whereas AI and e-discovery been around for 2 decades now. So we're at a point where these are more accepted use cases, but generative AI drafting and legal research, they're newer. So there's less accuracy, less studies, a little more skepticism toward them. And then finally, we talk about this ethical obligation in at least 40 states to understand the tech that you're actually using. And then clients are increasingly expecting their law firms to use AI. We said at the outset, 72% of businesses are using AI. And if you're a business using AI, you're not going to want to go to your lawyer and pay them to do manual work. You're also going to want them to be efficient so you could drive your own costs down when you have to pay outside companies for legal fees and legal work. So clients are driving this. I talked to a number of partners at big firms, and they do say their clients are starting to accept the use of it and now actively push it for cost savings. Whereas some clients, more so in the minority now, say explicitly, do not use AI tools, Gen AI tools, that is, because they're concerned about the privacy aspects and data leakages and potential bad press from that. But there's now a push for clients wanting law firms to use generative AI tools. And then one big takeaway is an important concept, especially for, I know there's some professors and faculty on here. AI chatbots, they're going to give you a response, and it may look structurally good, may look grammatically very well done, but how will you ever know if the substance of that response is good if you don't truly know that area of law? What I mean by that is you could be a first-year associate, or let's say you're a third year, second year, first year law student. You could go to ChatGPT and say, write me a contract, a SaaS agreement, software as a service agreement between a company and a vendor, and you're going to get a response. But if you don't know contract law, if you don't know SaaS agreements, how will you ever know if that contract's well written or not? You won't. So this underscores the importance of AI as a tool. You could use it. It could help with grammar, it could help with writing, but it's not going to replace the substance right now or really anytime soon. You still need to understand the underlying substance of an area of law to truly be able to use these tools effectively. Otherwise, you're going to create gibberish and outputs that are not quality in the actual substance of what they're doing. And that's a very important point, especially as law students and first-year associates to understand you still need to learn that substantive aspect of law to have that oversight and that quality of work after you get an AI output. So we did this, we talked about this at the outset, different ways AI is being used in practice. And now I'm going to jump and actually run through examples in our final 13 minutes here. So first, I'm going to pull up Spellbook first, because I know you all have had access to CoCounsel as well as Protege. Spellbook is a Microsoft plugin, and this is a contract for a SaaS agreement. And Spellbook's used by transactional lawyers. Basically, it's an assistant to help you review contracts. So here, I have a software as a service agreement between Wickard, my company, and the University of Richmond. This is not a real contract. So this is a fake contract I wrote up. And you can see I popped open my assistant Spellbook here. And what it allows you to do is ask questions about the contract. And what this chatbot has already done, it's taken the context of this whole agreement. And when I ask questions, it's just answering based on the content of this contract. Let's say I represent Richmond. Is this a fair agreement? And right now, it's taking that context from the contract, synthesizing it also with an underlying API. They use ChatGPT's GPT-4o. And let's see, it's able to answer this instantaneously. It says, no, the subscription fee is $1 billion for 1 month of service. Not a great deal for Richmond. This amount seems extraordinarily high, suggesting a potential issue of fairness. Here we have the agreement grants a non-exclusive, non-transferable, revocable license. The agreement is for an initial term of 1 month with provisions for termination for cause. So you can see here, you have basically these very tailored chatbots for contract law, where it's able to take your unique contract, answer questions that you have about it, and you'll see here, it actually provides citations. This is not a new practice, but becoming a mainstay in legal tech products, where whenever you get an answer, they're going to give you a citation. And this helps ground the legal AI tool in real authority. This helps reduce hallucinations because these legal AI tools are prompted on the back end to say, yes, give an answer, and then cite the authority it comes from. And usually, if it's not able to cite an authority, then it's a hallucination, and the system's able to remove it before the end user, being me, ultimately sees it. So you can see here, $1 billion took me right to the bad provision here. And you can go through all those and see what other issues there are. Other things you can now do with these contract tools, new clause, draft me a non-compete. And when you actually ask it to do this, it takes the context from the contract into account when it drafts this non-compete. So you can see here, it's able to take in that rest of the context. And look, just like that, a couple seconds, it's now drafting you a non-compete obligation clause. And you can actually toggle to find more. So that shows you how these contract tools are able to also write and draft new provisions, not only analyze and review them. And then here, you could use benchmark. This will automatically tell you the quality of my contract. And you can see here, it's absolutely terrible. 6% coverage. That basically means compared to industry standard SaaS agreements, mine only has 6% of what's typically there. So this is very bad. And the way they built this tool was by taking ChatGPT, the OpenAI's API, that is basically you taking the infrastructure and building upon it. They then fine-tuned their model using hundreds of thousands of example contracts, basically great examples of well-written contracts with all the provisions, and that's how they built this. So when you see this bad coverage, 6%, this is compared to all the contracts that they use in their training data. So that's how these legal AI tools are built. They take the foundational model from ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and they build on top of it with more advanced specific legal documentation for their niche area. And that's how it gets really good at analyzing contracts and drafting contracts. So that's an example, spellbook, of transactional generative AI tools. And now I'm going to shift over and show you Copilot in action. And we can decide together if we find it valuable compared to traditional search. So for students, if you're trying to access CoCounsel and try it out, go to Westlaw Precision, your traditional research database. CoCounsel is right up here on the top. Double click, you'll get taken right there. Maybe you're required to log in again. But right here, I'll run through some of the capabilities of CoCounsel. You can see right on the screen, it tells you right away what you could use it for. You could do research right here. You could review documents. That's just you uploading a document and you get an analysis. You could summarize documents. You could draft emails, memos, deposition outlines and questions. So you basically the whole panoply of options here. We'll do research specifically for this example. When you click on research, you have to double click on AI assisted research. And then when you put in a question, you're actually going to be prompted to pick from primary sources or secondary. So let's try it out. What is the rule for personal jurisdiction over out-of-state defendants in Virginia? And right away, it's going to prompt you to pick between that primary source and secondary. This might take a second. You can see it's still loading here with the loader. Okay, so here you can click on here, which is primary, case law, as well as regulatory information and statutes. And I want to note this here. This shows you all of the limitations. There are a lot of limitations, and the way you prompt a general AI model is very different than the way you prompt a legal specific model. You do not have to say, act like a lawyer, research this. The best practice is to keep it concise. Best practice is to directly ask your inquiry. So here's an example. Do not write an inquiry in the style of prompt, command, or instruction. A bad inquiry is you're an experienced lawyer who's an expert in so-and-so. This is how you would prompt a general AI model, but not a legal specific one. So what's better is to directly ask your question. Does the ADA require an employer to reassign an employee to a vacant position? So that's why I went right in and asked my legal question, because that's best practice. And you can click here about the skills. It'll show you the limitations for secondary sources, But let's run the inquiry right here, primary sources. And I asked, what is the rule for personal jurisdiction over out-of-state defendants in Virginia? And while that runs, we're going to pop back here and we're going to compare it to traditional search. So I'm going to ask the same exact question. Click go. Pretty quick. Checking back here, we're still at 10%, 30%. And like I said earlier, these are raised to the top. These are not the most recent decisions. These are from 2011, but it's a highly authoritative case. It's been cited a lot. It's a go-to source, another Supreme Court one from 2017. So here, we've already got our research, and this would be the traditional method. I'm sure you've all read Burger King in your 1L civil procedure class. And we'll check back here, and we're still loading on this end. So this just underscores a point I made earlier, and I'll emphasize generative AI in this area is not ready for prime time in terms of this being the sole method for legal research. You as a law student, first year, you should never use this tool as your sole use for research because the traditional method will still populate the most relevant and important cases. And let's take an example. Goodyear, BNSF, Young, Burger King. Let's see what they told us here. What is the rule? This actually focuses more so on state law. So you can see Virginia Code, we see Carter, Volkswagen, Volkswagen, Nathan, more Carter, Nathan. You could see the results are totally different. So we have all these cases, not one of them is cited here. So doing research in the traditional method and the Gen AI method, going to get you different results. And personally, me in practice right now, I'm using the traditional method because these are cases that have been cited over and over again. It's populating the best authority. Here, I would need to look more into these cases, but you're going to want to have a discerning eye, use both. This is not to say don't use co-counsel because I do think this technology is going to get better. It's important to use, and perhaps it does find a case that you were not able to find. So this is just a side-by-side example of these different outputs from the traditional method as well as the generative AI-powered one. One final feature I want to show you in co-counsel here. This is a cool one. It is under the research tab. Go to research. Rather than doing AI-assisted research, which taps into Westlaw's database of cases in law, go to search a database. You could actually create your own databases. So this is good for law students if you're writing a memo. You could go do all your research, find all your cases, download them as PDF or Word, and then you could actually start talking to a database just with those cases that you want. So I pre-made a database here for personal jurisdiction. I'll wait for it to load. This might take a little bit, but the first step would be creating the database. I pre-made it. So I have my personal jurisdiction research. Imagine you're writing a memo on personal jurisdiction. You already did the research using the traditional method, downloaded everything. You got these 3 amazing cases in Pennoyer, Worldwide Volkswagen, and Bristol Myers Squibb. You now select them. And now what I'm doing is chatting directly with these documents, and that's it. I'm not talking to Westlaw, all the case law on the database. I'm just talking to the 3 cases that I uploaded, right? Explain. And I can say something like explain personal jurisdiction, and it'll actually cite and take just from those 3 documents I uploaded. It might take a while because it also has to convert these documents into text. Some of them are very old ones, but that just goes to show you this capability of creating these databases that you can engage directly with, in which you narrow the universe of the information that these Gen AI research tools will tap into. So I'm going to briefly show you Lexis Protégé. This is also accessed through the general Lexis. So go to Lexis Plus. On the left side of your screen, or on the top right, brings you to the same place basically, except the right side is a chatbot. Go to Lexis Protégé, and it's pretty similar to co-counsel. You could ask a question, you could draft, you could summarize, you could upload documents and chat with them, and you can manage vaults. Managing vaults, very similar to that functionality from Westlaw over here. We'll pop back there because we should have an answer. Very similar to the database feature in Westlaw, where you can see I asked this question, explain personal jurisdiction, and it's doing it while citing everything from my uploaded cases. And I'll actually highlight it too. So you see the exact area where it pulled from. Very helpful if you're doing a memo or in practice researching or writing about an issue in a specific area. But Protege, very similar. You'll see one distinction when you're asking a question for legal research purposes here. It'll tell you to select the jurisdiction first, and then you can even select criminal or civil. This helps the system actually narrow the universe of cases it'll pull from and could improve accuracy. So those are examples of legal tools in practice, from contractual all the way to legal research and drafting. And we're down to 1-ish minutes. So I'll very briefly talk about some of the ethical considerations in the ABA opinion. And I'll pull that up here. So this opinion came out from the ABA, the American Bar Association. This is the largest voluntary organization of lawyers worldwide, based in the US mainly, but it's the biggest in the world. They issued this opinion. It's non-binding, but it provides guidance to other state bars and lawyers. And this was an opinion that came out in July of 2024. It's called Formal Opinion 512. And basically, it analyzed generative AI used by lawyers. It said you can use Gen AI if you're a lawyer, but you need to be competent in it. You need to understand how the tech works. You need to understand where your client information is going and understand the tools fully. It also emphasized the fact that confidential information, you need to retain it. There are already existing rules about lawyer competence. There's already existing rules about maintaining confidentiality in your client communications, and they apply to Gen AI equally to any other tool that you're using. Communication, the ABA opinion emphasized the fact that you always have to communicate with your client important developments in your case. You have a duty to advise them and keep them informed on updates. And this includes using Gen AI tools. If you are putting client data into a generative AI tool, you need to inform your client about that, advise them on the risks, on the benefits, and get their approval before you do it. So that was an emphasis in this ABA opinion. And then finally, reasonable fees. You cannot charge exorbitant fees of your clients if you use Gen AI tools. So if I spend 10 hours writing a memo, but now I use a generative AI tool to write it in 1 minute, I can't charge for 10 hours. I can only charge for the minute I'm using the tool. So you don't get to charge for these efficiency gains. And that was the big takeaway from this ABA opinion. It did not create any new AI specific rules. It took the existing rules and applied them to the generative AI context, just re-emphasizing our duties as lawyers. I did assign this as pre-reading, and I highly recommend reading it in detail. There's a lot more. And the final thing I'll jump to wrap us up before we take questions here is the regulatory landscape. So right now, there is no federal regulation, comprehensive federal regulation on AI. So it is now the Wild West for the states to deal with. There was a Trump executive order that repealed Joe Biden's executive order 14,110. The Biden executive order was passed in November of 2023 and in October of 2023. And essentially what it did was it required large language models, AI companies like OpenAI, Google Gemini, to report developments and report on any feature releases before they were released to the public. So there's a lot of reporting obligations, some red teaming, that's requirements that these models be tested and tried to jailbreak them and hack them in order to test their safety and efficiency. So there was a lot of requirements imposed by a Biden executive order. Trump, a couple weeks ago, rescinded it and put a new executive order in place, saying that within 180 days, which will bring us to July 22nd, 2025, he's going to issue a new AI action plan. So we don't have any substantive plan yet. It's coming about as a result of this directive and executive order. We should expect something by July 22nd. There's actually a public period put out there where people could put their commentary. But in the absence of federal legislation and regulation, the states, it's now the Wild West. Some states are regulating comprehensively, like Colorado. Others are going domain specific. Local law in New York requires review of AI tools before you use them in the employment context. That's an example of domain specific. But time is now up, so I'll pass it back to Dean Skalbeck. And this was a very quick crash course on AI, trying to touch on all the different areas of AI and law.
Thank you so much, Oliver. This has been really wonderful to hear from you. I'm just going to highlight two quick things because I know probably people have committed to 90 minutes and they want to take off. We've got a chance to do a little bit more in-depth Q&A. Carl Hom, our multimedia production manager here at the law school, posted something there that we'll also send out via email. You can sign up to join a Zoom chat for about a half an hour with Oliver in March, so we can do Q&A and actually see each other. So I'll post for you, Oliver, a couple of questions that we've got here, and anybody here who's still here, stick around for us. We promised you 90 minutes. We'll give you a little more, and if you need to get on to other things in life, please do, and I really appreciate everybody showing up. So Oliver, let me just go through a couple of the questions that came through in the chat here, just to get a sense of things, maybe sort of somewhat rapid fire, and just respond to what you think about this. So first one here is from somebody says, you mentioned LLMs won't check veracity of outputs, but is it true that with tools like Gemini's deep research and maybe a legal analog you are aware of for case research or motion drafting, will they be able to do that?
Yeah. So LLMs generally will not fact check in the sense of you ask a question, is it going to do research throughout all different places to find an answer? It's predicting. There have been innovations in the legal space specifically and in other domain specific areas where you need like a certain response. There will be fact checking stages where you integrate new agents. So you'd actually have your main LLM and you have other LLMs, maybe use OpenAI's ChatGPT API, then you'd have Claude running too. And then when you get a response from one, you'll have two other layers that fact check that LLM. So innately, the LLMs are not fact checking, but there are different engineering processes you could do on the back end to introduce other agents that fact check the responses. And if one of these agents say, oh, that answer is wrong, then it'll iterate again until it finds a better answer. Or one of these fact checkers will propose its answer, and then it would compare them. So there's extra engineering tools that you could use, that you could build upon, and these are being used by legal AI tools, because again, as lawyers, we need certain answers. It can't be like, we're not looking for like the most creative response. So there does have to be that element of grounding something in fact. Other things that are used, I mentioned grounding things and citing them. That's another way that there's this fact checking, where it's if a response comes back and you're not able to ground it in a legal document or authority, then it's not going to show up. That's another way. And then to your point, Google Deep Research, and now OpenAI is Deep Research too. That has an element introduced of searching the web and getting you sources from the web. So that's also another way where there's like a grounding element to it, because it'll provide citations in Google research, like every proposition it makes. So there's the addition of these other engineering techniques, but out of the box, these LLMs are not doing research for you. They're just predicting the next word, but there are new engineering techniques to improve the accuracy and add that extra fact checking beyond just a standard LLM.
Perfect. Next question here is, it's a pretty broad one, but I think that sort of what you've talked about here is sort of thinking about law students. We've been thinking about lawyers and things like that. Focusing on courts, how do you think courts are going to benefit from using AI?
Yeah, I think they definitely could. I mean, could assist with research, could assist with, if you have the ability just to take, I mean, some complaints get filed, they're hundreds of pages long, just being able to pop in that into a generative AI tool that could just summarize it for a judge. So the judge goes in knowing, oh, here, I have a 3-pager I could read rather than just reading the 100 pages. He'll eventually read the 100 pages, but it could help just kind of level set what to expect in that case. Other ways are automatically checking citations. I think there may be tools out there that do this, where you take a complaint from a party, you get it filed automatically. This AI tool could just pull all the citations and then run them through Lexis or Westlaw to validate if they're real or not, to combat all this like fake filing, hallucinated cases, which we see in the headlines of lawyers doing it. Another phenomenon is pro se litigants. There are many cases of pro se litigants filing hallucinated cases and fake case law because they're using ChatGPT. So I do think there's many good use cases that could help promote efficiency in the judiciary, but I think it starts with understanding it. I talked to a judge out in Utah. He's interested in doing AI training to train his clerks. So I do think there's interest from the judiciary and definitely ways to expedite case resolution.
Perfect. So one great thing about the audience that we've got here is a lot of the students are law students. We also have a paralegal program here at University of Richmond through our School of Professional and Continuing Studies. The person who directs that's in the audience here. So I'll ask something in this area, which is, how do you think that paralegals can take advantage of this, and what do you see as some of the challenges? And I'll say paralegals and people, in the enterprise of practicing law that might not have passed the bar or didn't sort of make the commitment to go to law school and get barred?
Yeah, I think having a full understanding of these tools is vital. Dean Skalback and the rest of the Richmond team, we talked about this earlier, how if you go to a law firm and you're a paralegal or just a legal assistant, a lot of times you're running the show with the tech. You're the one who talks to the vendors. You're the one who sits in on the trainings and then helps roll these tools out to the lawyers themselves. So as a paralegal, staying up to date on the best tools, understanding which of these tools could help with your law firm's use cases, that is a huge value add, especially to sift through all the noise. There's a lot of vendors out there that have these lofty claims of AI doing this or that, and the demos look great when you sit through them. But then when you use the products, you're not happy with it. So being on top of tech updates, knowing the big players in the space, knowing how those tools work, and knowing how to help lawyers use them, that is a huge value add in this space. And at my firm, we have a great paralegal who runs the show. Any tech question we have, we ask her the question, and she knows the answer. She knows all the vendors. So that is a big value add beyond just knowing the substantive practice of law, just having an understanding of the tech tools that law firms should use and then how to use them.
Perfect. Yeah. I've heard a talk from Mark Chandler, who has worked at the time as a of counsel for Cisco, and his framing of it was that paralegals are process ninjas. Like they're the ones that, like, if you want to go to somebody who understands how things actually work and how things get done, having a great one on your team is there. And it sounds like the advice is a process ninja who knows then the actual mechanics and the connections and the relationship of kind of those infrastructure pieces is a suggestion there.
Definitely.
Yeah, let's see. One other question that we've got here is, and I think you've kind of answered this, but we've witnessed this in some conversations with others. Do you think that AI and ChatGPT are killing Google? Rather, do you think that's just for the general purpose, like I'm going to satisfy an answer? Are people getting there? We've seen the dangers of what it looks like for hallucinations, but do you think people to some extent sort of don't care and just decide, well, this is good enough and the conversation is replacing the search and the research and the re-research kind of thing?
Yeah, I think 100%. I think it's part of OpenAI's strategy. It's the fight, the quote, the fight for the browser, where we're redefining how browser searches work. Because you can think about it, you go to a Google search. Now it's upon you to discern what's important. And then if you follow, and then you have to read the results. Then if you have a follow-up question, it's like, who do you ask? Do you have to go back and search other things or page 2 or page 3? Whereas you do search now, browser search is integrated. So you can now have internet search. So you go into ChatGPT, ask a question, it's already going to augment its answer with the most important information from the internet. And you could ask follow-up questions and get them answered immediately rather than you having to take that step of clicking through. So I do think we're going to see a future where there's already been a big movement toward just using ChatGPT rather than the browser. So I do think that will be the future, where you have a ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude agent on your phone in some capacity, where you use that instead of Google searches. So I do think it will kill the traditional browser Google search.
Perfect. And then the final question, I'll try to frame this in a way that speaks to some of what you demonstrated there. You showed these custom databases in CoCounsel and similar things on the version on Lexis. So somebody here asks that, in big law, where we're dealing with complex questions, it seems like maybe the simple like draft a complaint, draft an answer sort of things are somewhat systematized. But do you think that big law is going to move into sort of specialization, and then is specialization going to sort of build on itself so that if they're specialized with a large collection of like complicated matters, are they going to be harvesting those and sort of building on it, or what's the relationship there of sort of the value add for things where, table stakes are easy and the complexity is the place that bigger firms are sort of like establishing themselves in the market?
Yeah. So for background, most mid-sized firms, large firms, they'll have templates. So you're never going to start from scratch for the most part. It's very rare. Yep. So it'll be like, oh, I got to draft a motion to dismiss in a securities matter. You ask a partner, you ask someone, or go to the document management to find the last time you filed it a couple months ago, and you use that as a starting point. So in the use cases at big law firms, they are using it for legal research, niche research. They use platforms like Harvey 30% of the Am Law 100 as the top 100 law firms use Harvey, and they use it for use cases like if you have a couple if you're in a deal, maybe you have a couple 50 to 100 documents, you could drop in all the documents and get the data extracted automatically and put into different charts. And you give a chatbot go across all the documents and answer questions like, oh, which document had this information or factoid, and it'll find that document for you. So those are some of the use cases. No matter how complex or simple, if you have a lot of documents to go through, having a tool like that's very helpful. But drafting something from scratch, rather rare. More likely, what you're going to do is you're going to get a contract from the opposing side, and then you're going to want to mark it up or review it and identify areas that provisions are missing or rewrite things that are more favorable to you. So that's where that Spellbook plugin would come from, where it's like you're analyzing a contract that came from someone else, and then you're going to try to improve your negotiating side. So those are some of the more salient use cases rather than just using it to like write something anew, which would be rare in big law practice.
Perfect. I think we got through all of the questions here. We are going to send out a summary of things to all the attendees here. What we're going to do is share with you all a feedback question. We want to hear what you'd like to know and what we would want to do if we got another event together, and questions that you've got. And then Carl Hom had posted in the chat, and we'll also send it out via email, an opportunity to get back together for about a half an hour in March, just to see each other face to face and ask maybe some of the questions that either weren't asked or we want to go a little bit more in depth into. Oliver, appreciate this tremendously. Glad that we moved it to Zoom, because otherwise nobody would be on campus and we wouldn't have had it happen. So this has been wonderful. I really appreciate all of your time, and excited at all the attendees who made it through 90 plus minutes here on a Thursday night towards the end of the week in February. So thank you so much. And with that, it concludes our AI Bootcamp for 2025 here at University of Richmond School of Law.
Thank you all.